Hi guys, my name is Kevin Patel. I am a EMS medical director for the McKinney Fire Department. I work for Best EMS, and our agency is medical director for multiple different fire departments in the DFW Metroplex and extending out to Houston as well. So I'm honored to be here to talk to you guys about firefighter cardiovascular health. This is something that is very dear to me and is very important that we want to make sure you guys are safe out there when you guys are providing services like you do. So first of all, thank you guys all for your service, and I am very honored to be here today. So I want to go ahead and just start off with the first thing, and that's going to be numbers. We can all talk numbers, so I want to start off with that. And this is from the Texas State Fire Marshal's Office. And here we can see on the left, there's national numbers of on-duty firefighter deaths. And on the right is Texas numbers of on-duty firefighter deaths. And as you can see, in 2013, we had a little spike in our deaths, and also in 2020. And I believe 2013 was the same year we had the West fertilizer event. And then also in 2020, we all know that's when COVID hit the United States. Looking at paid versus volunteer agencies, we see that more people appear to have on-duty deaths in a volunteer service as opposed to in a paid service. And this is just pure speculation. It could be due to multiple reasons. And this is not really, as far as I know, been studied. But it could be that the volunteer agencies, they have people that are more stressed at work, right? They may not get paid accordingly, right? It's a volunteer agency. It could be their third or fourth or fifth job, and that's what I mean as a stressor. And they're not getting the appropriate sleep that they need, right? So there's factors that go into that. They may not have the top of the line equipment that paid departments have. So there could be multiple reasons, and again, that's pure speculation, not been actually studied as far as I know, as to why there's more deaths in the volunteer service. So this is fatality types investigated by the State Fire Marshal Office. And on the bottom left there, you see that those are deaths on the fire ground or during fireground operations. That's 34.7% of deaths since 2001. And on the top right, or on the right-hand side there, you see medical conditions encompassing about 44.4% of deaths since 2001. Now, this is a little confusing to me, and the Fire Marshal's Office didn't really go into this from my reading. But I don't know if somebody had a medical condition on the fire ground that occurred. I'm not sure if that number is a medical condition, tallied as a medical condition, versus if that was a death on the fire ground during fireground operations. So we want to know what's killing you guys. We want to make sure that we prevent those deaths from occurring. We need you guys out there to provide a public service. And we see here that there were 140 on-duty deaths in 2020 per the NFPA. This is the NFPA report that came out in 2020. And it shows that the largest share in 2020 was due to COVID-19. There were 78. And this report focused on the 62 non-COVID deaths. When you're focusing on those 62 non-COVID deaths, once again, sudden cardiac death hits the top. That's the reason why you guys are dying in the fire service. That's one of the main reasons why you guys are dying in the fire service. And that has always been the top number since the NFPA began studying this in 1977. So here we can see on the top left, firefighter deaths by type of duty. And majority of that is on the fire ground, and we'll get into why that is. And also, there's another component there that's responding to or returning from alarms. You see that firefighters die because they are overexerting themselves due to some sort of stressor or due to some medical condition, and usually the sudden cardiac death is the highest cause of death. And per this report, 47% had sudden cardiac death. As you age, you have an increased risk of dying as well. So the bottom right there shows age in accordance. So the red in there shows how many people have died of sudden cardiac death according to that age. That being said, it's not only the elderly that are dying in the fire service from sudden cardiac death, it's the young ones as well. Okay, so it's it goes both ways. So we're talking about line of duty deaths. There's a bunch of definitions, and NIOSH has their own, NFPA has their own, Texas State Fire Marshal has their own as well. And it essentially includes anything that you're doing for the fire service. So that be while you're on duty, or if you're coming in for training, and also it includes 24 hours after you've been off of duty as well. So that's what they're mostly including when we're talking about these line of duty deaths. So in 1998, Congress recognized the need to address the national problem of work-related firefighter deaths. And they funded NIOSH to essentially create a firefighter safety initiative. And what they did was they created this firefighter fatality investigation and prevention program. They saw the need and acted on it. And this program has shown that about 80 to 100 firefighters die each year, and approximately half of those line of duty deaths are caused by heart attacks and other cardiovascular disease. It's very important here to note that for every single on-duty death that there are 17 non-fatal cardiovascular related events in the U.S. Fire Service. And so I think it's a very important number to actually highlight. For every one death, there are 17 others that are going through some sort of cardiovascular event that occurs that's non-fatal. Other leading fatalities per this report was rapid fire progression, struck by events, lost or disoriented, and falls as well. The next few slides are going to go through the most recent deaths that were either studied by the State Fire Marshal's Office or NIOSH. And this initial one is by the State Fire Marshal's Office. And this individual did not respond to a call. It's a volunteer fire department. He didn't respond to a call. The crew returned to the station, and they noted that he was deceased on the floor. An autopsy revealed that the cause of death of this individual was due to a cardiac event. This individual was outside the Houston Fire Department, one of the stations, and was doing some lawn care on his typical duty date. He was found the following morning with lividity, and so CPR was not initiated on this patient. He was determined to have a coronary thrombus, and the cause of death was essentially due to that coronary thrombus, a cardiovascular event. When NIOSH looks at these events, they have certain recommendations. So the next three are from NIOSH, and they will have recommendations as to what they thought would be the next best thing for the fire service to do in order to prevent cardiovascular deaths. So this individual, he was completing departmental rapid intervention team training. He ignored some of his symptoms that he was having. He eventually had a syncope episode that was witnessed, and unfortunately did not obtain ROSC. A medical examiner's report listed the cause of death of this individual as atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. And NIOSH here recommended that there is a phase-in of a comprehensive wellness and fitness program for all firefighters. And they also recommended that all firefighters are aware of the warning signs of an impending cardiac event. This gentleman failed to respond to the apparatus for a call, and he was found to be unconscious in the hallway leading to the apparatus bay. CPR was initiated, and unfortunately ROSC was not obtained. And the medical examiner determined that this cause of death was due to an acute myocardial infarction. The NIOSH recommended here essentially that a physician knowledgeable in firefighter duties, which includes the PPE that they wear, including the SCBAs, and inclusive with the stressful environments that they are in, that type of physician actually sign off patients to be cleared for duty per the NFPA 1582 physicals. They also recommended that there's a tracking system for all the consults that need to be made within those NFPA physicals. And also they recommended to adopt a mandatory comprehensive wellness and fitness program for all firefighters. This 41-year-old gentleman, he was finishing some training. They did some forcible entry, pulling some hose, and eventually he had some numbness of the arm, got dizzy, and had loss of consciousness. Again, he succumbed to those to a cardiovascular event. Here, NIOSH recommended, once again, 1582 physicals by a physician who is knowledgeable in the physical practices of firefighting, and also an adoption of a mandatory comprehensive wellness and fitness program for firefighters. A couple things that I take away from just those 5 cases, and it's we always say that a cardiovascular event or a cardiac arrest that is witnessed has the best chance of having ROSC or having a mortality benefit, right? And here, at least in the last 3, those were witnessed events, and none of them got ROSC. So that is something that I wanted to actually point out as well. Further, all 3 of those, I should say, the NFPA recommended a mandatory comprehensive wellness and fitness program for all firefighters. And I kind of want to hone in on that and say, how many agencies that do you know, or does your own agency have a mandatory comprehensive wellness and fitness program? And if you don't, I think that's something to certainly work on, and you'll see why. So we know the cardiovascular risk factors for coronary disease, and that includes smoking, hypertension, obesity, dyslipidemia, diabetes, and age. But this looks at cardiovascular risk factors among firefighters. So smoking, 10 to 18% smoke in the fire service, and 40 to 50% of those that smoke have a cardiovascular on-duty death. Hypertension. 56% of individuals that have undergone an autopsy due to their cardiovascular event had some sort of indication in their heart that they had a hypertensive heart disease. Obesity. 40% of firefighters are obese, and that's certainly a risk factor for cardiovascular disease. Dyslipidemia. If your total cholesterol level is 200 or greater, so if it's high total cholesterol, it's associated with a 2.4-fold increase risk of coronary heart disease retirement. So that means something happened from a cardiac standpoint and you can't return to work due to that. And also, it's associated with a 4.4-fold increase of on-duty coronary heart disease death. Diabetes is associated with a 10 to 13-fold increase of on-duty coronary heart disease death within the fire service. And age. As individuals age, you can see that they are killed more often due to a heart event in all those different types of scenarios. So fire suppression, alarm response, alarm return, and so on. So as you age, you are more likely to die from an on-duty coronary event. But that's not to say that young people aren't dying as well. You can see on the left, all the way to the left side of those of each one of those scenarios, you see that there is some sort of number. It's not 0 for those that are in the 20 to 39 year age range. So let's talk about some of the cardiovascular hazards that you may not know of that you have. Okay, there's chronic cardiovascular hazards, and then there's acute cardiovascular hazards. So here's the chronic cardiovascular hazards here. In the fire service, we have 24-hour shifts, 48-hour shifts, 72-hour shifts, and it can go on depending on if you're in a volunteer service, if you're in a paid service, and what your agency allows you to do. While you're on service, you may not get the best sleep. You're going to be having some sort of inadequate physical activity. You may not eat the best because you're trying to eat whenever you can, and these are all problems when it comes to cardiovascular health. Smoke exposure. SCBAs are great. We know they work. We know they help in fires. But what happens when the fire is done? When the fire is fought, when all the fire is out and there's still smoke around, the SCBA comes off. So when you're still doing fire suppression or immediately after fire suppression, the SCBA is off, there's a risk there. You're getting smoke exposure there as well. Shift work. We know shift work is not the greatest on the human body, and that comes from studies from other types of professions as well. During shift work, you don't get the best amount of sleep, like I stated before, and that within itself will lead you to have insulin resistance. Insulin resistance essentially tells your body to increase my insulin because I don't have enough insulin, and that insulin itself is not good. It's gonna cause you to gain weight. It's going to cause hypertension. It's going to cause you the risk factors for coronary vascular disease. Then we have acute cardiovascular hazards and the acute strains. You have the genetic makeup of yourself, right? You have the health status of yourself, the genetic makeup, and the fitness profile that you have initially when you're going into fighting a fire. When you get to that fire, you throw on your PPE, you put on your SCBA, you are starting to fight that fire. And it could be a very hot day that day, right? So your heart is getting more and more strained as you're doing all this. Further, you're going into a dangerous type of scene potentially, and that can increase your heart rate as well. So all those things come together and they cause that cardiovascular strain of firefighting. And with that, you have an increase of heart rate, you have an increase, and then we'll talk about this, then later a decrease of your stroke volume, and then you have increase in oxygen consumption. And when you do that, you strain your heart. So every time you guys go in to fight that fire, you're straining your heart. It's a stress test for you guys. And on the right here, what I'm showing is they did a study and they showed essentially what happens to your heart rate at rest during a first trial, second trial, and third trial of firefighting. And within that, I believe the trial periods were about 10 minutes, and the resting phase was only between the second and third trial, and that was about 7 minutes. And I believe that's what it was. And you can see here that your heart rate continues to rise between those trials. But your stroke volume, which is that bottom one in the blue, it initially rises and then it goes down. Physiology will tell me that when your heart rate goes up, your stroke volume should go up, right? So for some reason, your stroke volume in firefighters goes down, okay? And that's thought to be because of venous pooling in your extremities, okay? Because your extremities are doing a lot of work. So it could be due to the venous pooling in your extremities, and then on top of that, all the stuff that you guys have on, and you guys aren't hydrating as well while you're firefighting, that can also decrease the amount of fluid that you have in your body or the blood that you have in your body, and that can certainly decrease the stroke volume that you have at the time. So I thought that was very interesting to note, and this could be this could have some sort of mechanistic correlation to why this is such a big deal in the fire service, or why you guys are actually fighting a fire. And there's also circadian patterns, and so typically when a layperson is going to have a coronary event, it's more likely to occur between 6 a.m. and noon. For firefighters, however, for you guys, it's later on in the day. It's between noon and midnight. And that's when your call volume is high as well. So what this paper shows is that as call volume goes up throughout the day, there are more firefighter cardiovascular events that occur, and there's also more traumatic deaths that occur. So I thought that was pretty interesting as well. So this paper goes into the relation of emergency duties to cardiac death among U.S. firefighters. And we see here that the largest portion of death occurs during firefighting activities, but that's only 1% of the annual occupational time that you guys are performing that duty. So I thought that was very important, and there's got to be a link to that. Why is it that this one duty that you guys do, that's 1% of your time, actually going on a fire and fighting a fire, 33% of people, or 30% of the time, people are dying on that from a cardiovascular event. And this is where the safety officer comes in. This is why they're very important to be on scene. Make sure you guys aren't overexerting yourself, staying well hydrated. On the left side of the slide there, kind of goes into why this could be. And it could be because you have coagulatory and also thrombolytic activity that occurs while actually stressing your body. And what may be happening, or what this study kind of showed, is that the coagulatory aspect remains even 2 hours after firefighting, but that thrombolytic activity kind of goes away. So you come into a procoagulatory state after firefighting, right after firefighting, and that could be a link between there and why individuals are dying from that fire suppression activity. When we're comparing to station duties, you have 112 times risk of increased risk of cardiac death while doing fire suppression. 8 times risk during alarm response, and 7 times risk during physical training. So this paper went through the risk factors by BMI and age in the United States firefighters. And what they essentially looked at was the difference between increasing BMI and age, and then BMI alone when it comes to males and females. So in males, the higher your BMI, the greater your age, you had an increased prevalence of blood pressure, cholesterol, and triglycerides, as well as your blood glucose. If you took BMI alone and took out the age, so if you just had an increasing BMI alone, you had a higher prevalence of blood pressure, high triglycerides, and low density lipoprotein cholesterol with all age groups. And the high density lipoprotein, that's the good cholesterol. So if that's low, that's bad. In females, when you looked at normal weight females versus obese females, you had an increased blood pressure for those that were obese at 57%, but if you were normal weight, it was 25%. A decreased HDL for normal weight was 8%, and if you were obese, that percentage went up to 45%. And for blood glucose, normal weight individuals had 0%, as opposed to those that were obese had 11% in terms of their increased blood glucose. And essentially, this kind of tells us that the higher your BMI, the higher your age, you have a worse profile for cardiovascular risk profile. And you want to make sure that you get firefighters when they're young. You want to make sure that there is some sort of wellness program in place, and that is promoted or mandated throughout the firefighter's career while they're younger, in order for them to have a better cardiovascular risk profile. So here, what this study shows is that essentially the more you work out, the better off you're going to be, right? Increased frequency, duration, and intensity of working out, you have a higher cardiorespiratory fitness, okay? And this showed that if you looked at frequency alone, so the amount of times that you work out alone, you had decreased total cholesterol, triglycerides, blood glucose, and an increase in HDL, and that was just on frequency. And it was a significant actual relationship between that. However, within this study, if you had an increasing BMI, you kind of had a worsening profile as opposed to those that had a decreasing BMI. So weight has a lot to do with it as well, okay? And what we want to make sure we focus on is that we introduce some sort of activity or mandate within the fire service that individuals kind of have to work out while they're at work, right? Or that they have some sort of cardiovascular activity that they take part in when they're off shift, right? And the reason being is we want to make sure that they have a good cardiovascular or cardiorespiratory profile when it comes down to it. And we want to make sure that they're actually working out in terms of their frequency. So the more they work out, the better it is for them. So how do we manage cardiovascular disease in the fire service? We want to make sure that it's part of their pre-placement medical exams. Make sure that we hire people that we know are going to be successful, and not hire somebody who is gonna fail. We don't want to hire them to fail, right? And we should probably have some sort of baseline testing for that, right? We want to make sure that they get their blood pressure, the lipids, their glucose, EKG, and if they can't do the job, then we shouldn't hire them into the service. We want to make sure that there's physical abilities testing, a fitness and wellness program for the firefighters to partake in, and also periodic medical examinations as well to see how they're doing. Primary prevention is key, right? Primary prevention is key. We want to make sure we eat right, we exercise regularly, lose weight safely, and prevent that unsupervised overexertion. So this is a busy chart, and essentially what this is something that you work with your primary care physician with. right? You want to make sure that you prevent cardiovascular disease risks. So you want to try to make sure that you prevent high blood glucose, high cholesterol, hypertension. You want to take away smoking, right? You want to lose weight safely, right? And so you need to work with your primary care physician to prevent this from occurring. Exercising regularly. The AHA recommends 150 minutes per week of moderately intense aerobic activity or some sort of aerobic activity. 150 minutes. It's not much. 30 minutes a day. And within that, it's not just cardiovascular activity. So you're not just running. You're not just doing burpees all day. You want to make sure that you have some sort of muscle strengthening activity as well. Lifting weights is very important to include within that. Want to make sure that you spend less time sitting. So even just getting up and walking around the firehouse when people are watching TV, walking around during advertises, going around running laps around the firehouse when you guys are in house and not actively going to a call. Very important to continue that type of activity, and you want to increase the amount of intensity gradually over time and not just be so intense initially. There's benefits of physical activity, and we know those benefits, and that's essentially everything that's against cardiovascular disease, right? You want to make sure the benefits include decreasing your blood glucose, it decreases your bad cholesterol, it increases your good cholesterol, it decreases your weight, and we all know that these are risk factors for cardiovascular disease, and by working out, you're going to have a better cardiorespiratory profile. This study showed just that. What happens in 5 years? What happened to these firefighters? What happened to them if they lost weight, if they were stable, or if they gained weight? And they showed that those that lost weight did well. They had a decreased total cholesterol, they had a decreased LDL cholesterol, decreased blood pressure, and they had a high HDL, which is great. But those that gained weight, they had a high total cholesterol, high LDL cholesterol, high BGL, and a decreased HDL. So essentially, this is kind of proven that 50% of these individuals had a bad profile after 5 years. So we want to make sure that we catch firefighters while they're early on in their career. And if you aren't early on in your career right now, it's never too late. You can still start working out, still get up and walk around just a little bit, right? And that will help. Every type of physical activity you do is going to help your cardiorespiratory profile. Here's a BMI chart, and I put this up just to try to get you a gauge as to where you sit. Okay, the area in red is overweight. The area to the right of that is obese, and so where we want to sit is the area to the left of the red, and it's quite eye-opening where people sit. And I'll tell you, me and my profile, I sit in I'm just there. I'm just at the overweight category, and that's me. So we know that cardiovascular disease is the leading cause of on-duty deaths among firefighters. And we also know the physiology around it, right? We know there's an acute factor of the strain to your heart, and there's chronic risk factors that you may have or that you're exposed to just by being in that fire service. We know that on-duty deaths are overwhelmingly more frequent during the strenuous activities as compared to non-emergent situations when you're at the firehouse. And we also understand that a lot of the cardiovascular disease deaths that occur are mostly exclusively in those that have underlying coronary disease. We want to make sure that fire agencies have some sort of way to combat that. We want to make sure that there's some sort of formal way that these agencies are able to promote health and wellness. Either that be periodic physical exams, or that could be having some sort of workout routine that goes out to your agencies or to your stations on certain days. And this is part of the duties of the day is working out. And I think that would be great to promote within the fire service. But I'll leave you with this last point in this last conclusion from this paper here. And that is on the basis of the overwhelming evidence supporting markedly higher relative risk of on-duty death and disability among firefighters with established coronary heart disease. Most firefighters with clinically significant coronary heart disease should be restricted from participating in strenuous emergency duties. And that is because of all the things that we talked about today. It's leading you guys to your on-duty coronary or cardiovascular death. We want to try to prevent that as much as we can. So with that, I want to say thanks for all you do, and I am welcome any type of questions that you may have. My personal email is Kevin Patel, my first and last name, 1287@gmail.com. You guys are more than welcome to email me at any point, and I can certainly provide you with this slide set. I can provide you with references. I'm realizing I forgot to put in references. I can provide you with all the references which are within the slide set. And I'm more than happy to talk to you about cardiovascular health, because we need to make sure that you guys are staying safe out there. Thanks for everything.